Everyone. So yesterday we started with the section B and we have finished a few of the topics. Most of the topics is done. So we are left with few more topics. We'll be covering that today. Okay. So we'll be starting with the derivatives, hedging and short-term financing. Am I audible to everyone? Am I audible? Okay. So we can start with the session. So I'll be starting with the short-term financing, how the company can have the short-term financing, how they can raise the fund in the short term with the help of the bank loans and trade credit and factoring. So mainly short-term loans, short-term financing means the short-term loans, how we can raise the fund through the short-term loans. So usually the commercial banks, what is the function of banks? Anyone tell what is the function? What is their function? The normal function of banks? What's their function? What's the function of bank? Accepting deposit and giving loans. That is a common function, right? Just give me a minute. So here also how the short-term loans will be given by the commercial banks. Matures in less than 1 year. It can be a secured loan. It can be unsecured loan also. What do you mean by secured loan? Secured loan. What are secured loans? The loans which are? What are secured loans? You must be knowing this. The loans which are backed by the some collaterals. Okay, so those are called as secured loans. Unsecured means only backed with the credit worthiness or reputation or brand loyalty of the organization. So based on that, which are the loans is here, that is called as unsecured loans. So short-term loans can be of secured loans, unsecured loans, which will be maturing less than the 1 year. We come across many short-term loans, self-liquidating loans, floating lanes, so mainly tested in short-term loans, mainly tested with the what should be the interest rate on the loan that you are taking, the short-term loans that you are taking. So we come across self-liquidating loans. That means pays for itself through revenue from the financed activity. That means so if at all we have purchased any, we have taken loan for any one particular purpose. Let's say maybe for the agriculture purpose we have taken the loan. So whatever the revenue I get from that particular loan, from the particular agriculture activities, based on that only, but whatever the revenue I get from that agriculture activity, that revenue itself will be used to repay the loan. That is called as self-liquidating loan. So payment will be done through the revenue that I get from the financed activity. If I'm financing the activity, if I'm financing through the if I'm taking the loan for agricultural purpose, whatever I earn from that agricultural activity, based on that revenue only, I will be using that revenue itself to repay the loan. That is called as self-liquidating loan. And floating loan in the sense, security interest is in constantly changing property. That means we are taking the loan based on keeping the collateral of the changing assets. Mainly with the current assets, AR and inventory are the frequently changing current assets. So if the loan is taken on those frequently changing current assets, those are called as floating laying loans. Okay. Then compensating balance. So we come across in short-term loans, we come across short-term loans with the simple interest, short-term loans with the compensating balance, short-term loans with the discount interest, short-term loans with the compensating as well as discount rate. So we come across these four things. Compensate short-term loans with the normal simple interest means the normal. So we will be taking the short-term loans and paying some the interest. That is normal thing. What happen? Normal things happen. Normal functioning. Whereas if there is a short term, if we're taking a short term loans with a compensating balance means that means it requires compensating balance. It requires the company to to keep some of the amount with the company in the bank account itself, mainly for the It acts as a protection also in chances of default, or it may act also to and compensating balance may also be used for the banking services also. So if there is a compensating balance, so how do we calculate the interest rate? Can anyone know? Can anyone give me the formula to calculate the interest rate when there is when the loan is given, short-term loan is given on the compensating balance with the compensating balance? What formula you can use? What formula you'll be using to find out the effective interest rate? Anyone? So what will be the formula? Interest, whatever the interest, annualized interest divided by the usable funds. That means the gross loan amount minus the if there is a compensating balance, that means that compensating balance has to be deducted in the new denominator. So numerator will be of the interest rate, the annualized interest rate, whereas denominator will be the principal amount minus the gross loan amount minus the compensating balance. So if at all already we and one more thing. So if we are earning any interest on the loan on the compensating balance, let's say the bank is asking us to keep 50,000 as compensating balance, and on the 50,000 the company the bank is giving some of the interest. That means we're earning some interest. So if at all we're earning some interest, that has to be deducted in the numerator. If not, no. And if at all we are keeping any, if at all already, if we have any sum of, let's say 50,000 as the compensating balance has to be kept, but the bank is already, the company is already keeping 25,000 in its account. That means only remaining 25,000 will be kept out of the bank loan, out of the gross amount. So these things you have to be keep in mind when the company is giving the loan with the compensating balance. Then discount interest statement, that means the company is the loan is given less than the gross amount. Bank deducts interest upfront from the loan proceeds. Borrowers receives less than, for example, 10 lakh is the, sorry, 1 lakh is the loan amount. Let's keep it a 1 lakh as a gross amount. In that the company, if it is a discount interest rate, if it is a discounted loan, that means some of the percentage of loan, that is, let's say 20% is discounted. So 20% means 1 lakh into 20%, 20,000 of the amount has to be is discount plus interest. So we have to pay the interest as well as it will be discounted also. So the discounted amount also has to be deducted in the denominator. So interest rate will be paid. So what will be the effective interest rate? Formula: interest rate divided by the gross loan amount minus the discounted amount. We will be getting to know the discounted interest rate. What should be the annual interest rate when the bank when the loan is given discounted with the interest rate? Okay, discounted loan. So it can be compensating by, and the loan can also be with the compensating balance and discount interest rate. At that time, both the compensating balance amount and discount amount has to be deducted from the denominator. And if at all the company is earning any of the interest, that has to be deducted in the numerator. So mainly just keep in mind, numerator will be the net interest rate, denominator will be the usable fund. What is the actual fund you will be getting to your hand for your operations? So these points you have to keep in mind when you come across a short-term bank loan. You may expect the questions like, they may ask you the terms also, what do you mean by self-liquidating loans? What do you mean by floating lanes? And they may mainly testing you with the interest rate. What will the effective interest rate if you take compensating balance loan or loan with discount rate? So these questions you can expect, and they may ask you for the interest amount. You have always interest has to be annualized. Keep that in mind. So if it is for quarters, if it is for half month, you have to annualize it by multiplying with 6 or multiplying with 2 if it is of half month, half year. So in that way, you have to annualize the interest amount. So these points you have to keep in mind. They may ask you for the interest expenses, interest earned, net interest rate, effective interest rate. All these terms you have to be knowing in the short-term loans. Then with respect to the trade credit, when the supplier gives the credit on whatever we have purchased, mainly it is of credit purchase only. So when this is a trade credit, what we have to do? So when the supplier is giving us the discount, some of the discount, it is told that it is better to take the discount, better to take the avail the discount that the supplier is giving. So usually the terms will be like, if the supplier is giving 2 by 10 net 30 means, if at all we are paying the credit within 10 days, we will be getting the 2% discount. So usually the cost of not taking the discount is more costly. That means if at all we are not availing that discount, then it will cost us even more when we are paying at the net due date. So usually it is said it is better to take the discount than not taking the discount. Okay. So 2% discount if paid within the 10 days, or if at all I'm not availing the discount, then I have to pay the full amount at the due date. So how do we calculate the cost of not taking the discount? They may ask you the cost of not taking discount. They can ask you has effective interest rate, annual interest rate, or they can directly ask you what is the cost of not taking the discount also. Okay. How do we calculate discount rate percentage? Okay, this can be interchanged. So we'll be going with 365 days divided by the net days minus the discount days, multiplied with the 100 by discount rate divided by 1 minus discount rate. It can be interchanged also. Okay. So this is how we calculate the not taking. That is how we calculate if at all we are not taking the discount, not availing the discount, what will be the effective interest rate. So examples are like, this is the example they have given. And if at all we need the immediate cash, we can go for the factoring of receivables. That means we can sell the AR to the factors, which are the financial institutions who give us the immediate cash. So factoring receivables, company sells its AR to factor for immediate cash. If at all the company wants the immediate cash and they cannot wait until the customers are paying, then we can go for the factoring of receivables, where we will be selling the AR for the factors, financial institutions who will be giving us the immediate cash by imposing some of the fees, some of the charges, and the interest rate. Just give me a minute. So we can sell the AR without recourse and with recourse. Without recourse means factors bears all the credit loss risk. That means we are selling the entire AR to the factor. That means everything. If at all the factor is unable to collect the AR from the customers, then they have to bear that credit losses. It is called as without recourse. When we are selling the AR without recourse, that means we are shifting entire risk to the factors. And as the risk is high, they may be charging the high interest rate or high charges for taking the credit losses. And we can sell with the recourse also. That means selling company retains the credit loss risk. If at all if at all factor is unable to receive some AR from the customers, then they can whatever the credit loss is there, it will be bared by the selling company only. So the credit loss will be remaining with the factoring company itself, with the factoring receivables, with the selling company which is selling the AR. And the cash received, so whatever the immediate cash we are receiving, it can be reduced by by these amount. Factoring fees we will be paying, interest we will be paying, allowance returns will be paying. So factoring fee, allowance, interest are the amount which will be reducing our immediate cash. Okay, so these things you have to keep in mind. Then we have some other sources of short-term financing: revolving line of credit, inventory financing, accrued expenses, warehouse financing, commercial paper, VA. These are the few of the other sources of financing we can be used to finance our operations or purchase the assets. We'll start with revolving line of credit. That means borrow up to a limit anytime, borrow up to a approved limit anytime, secured by inventories or receivables, reducing the bank risk. Usually it will be of secured with a collateral with the inventory or receivables. As it is having a collateral, it will be reducing the risk, which will lead to the reduced interest rate. So borrowing up to a limit, let's say revolving line of credit means we can, the bank is giving, let's say 10 lakh. Until 10 lakh, we can we can take and we can repay, we can take and we can repay. That is called as revolving line of credit. So up to 10 lakh, I can take any of the amount, I can repay. Again, I can take any of the amount, I can repay. That is called as revolving line of credit, usually backed up by the inventories or receivables. As there is a collateral, the interest rate will be less, as it is of less risk. Then inventory financing, lenders owns the inventory, borrowers holds and sells on the lender's behalf, repays lenders with the interest. So inventory financing means it will be between the lender and the borrower. Lender is the one who purchases the inventory, and on behalf of lender, borrower will be holding the inventory and selling on behalf of lender. Uh, so just for example, let's say lender has purchased some of it, let's say for 1 lakh of inventory, and it will be given, borrower will be holding that inventory, but ownership will be staying with the lender itself. And the borrower will sell those on the behalf of lender, and whatever the amount that the lender will get, that the borrower will get. Let's say the borrower has purchased it for 1 lakh, the lender purchased it for 1 lakh, borrower sold it for 1,50,000. So 50,000 will be the profit, but he has to pay some of the interest for the lender, which will reduce the borrower's profit. So this is what inventory financing. Then accrued expenses, wages, taxes won't not get paid. So usually accrued expenses, spontaneous, it is of credit only. We can give it as trade credit. So when we make usually what happens when spontaneously the expenses will increase. For example, if at all the sales is increasing, we have to produce more. So if we want to produce more, we want to purchase the raw materials more. It's spontaneous. It's not like wantedly. Spontaneously, due to increase in the sales, the credit also increases. That is called as accrued expenses. Mainly it is of trade credit only. Then warehouse financing, inventory held at the third party warehouse. So loan is given based on the uh, credit worthiness of the third party. So we are keeping our inventory in the third party's warehouse. So third party warehouse will give us a receipt with regard to quantity, everything. So that receipt will be submitted in the bank to get the loan. So if the third party is a very credit worthy person, then the bank will approve the loan. So that is what called as warehouse financing. Then commercial paper, as you know, it is an unsecured source of financing which will be issued by the large companies. US unsecured commercial paper also will be having a less interest rate because it's of large companies. Usually they will be having the high credit worthiness. So that is why the commercial paper also will be having a less interest rate. And BA, as you know, time draft, with the help of time draft, they can make the financing. Immediate cash. So this is what of bank loans, short-term financing, bank loans, and credit factorings. Okay. So are you clear on these points? Anything you have to add on? Everyone, are you getting it? Anything you have to add on? Are you clear on these points? Am I audible? Everyone? Okay. Then we come for the derivatives. What do you mean by derivative? So derivative is it's a small concept in section B, but understanding it is very important. So what do you mean by derivatives? You were all there in the revision session, so you must be knowing the meaning of derivatives. What do you mean by that? The value of it's a financial contract where the value depends on what? The value of the contract will depend on, what? The value of the financial contract will be depending on, very good, underlying asset. So its derivative means we are deriving the value of a contract based on an underlying asset. Asset can be of stock, can be of commodity, can be of bonds. So it can be anything. So derivative in the sense it's a financial contract whose value will depend on the underlying assets, commodity, which are the physical assets like oil, gold, silver, all these things are the commodities. It can be financial assets like bonds, whereas marketable securities like market variables, maybe stocks. So these are the contracts. So mainly derivative talks about the financial contracts, which where will be depending on the how this commodities, this financial assets will be acting. So depends on these assets value, the derivative will be the value will be derived. So we come across mainly three types of derived hedging strategies here: fair value hedge, cash flow hedge, and net investment hedge. Fair value hedge means what? Protect against the changes in the fair value of a recognized assets or liability. That means mainly to protect the current value of the assets or liabilities. We come across that is called as fair value hedge. Fair value. So mainly with that's what. So fair value adjustments mainly done for the protection of the current value. Let's say, for example, a bond. Bond is a kind of asset for us. Now, so let's say my bond is having 10 lakh of worth today. So I am fearing that in the future, maybe there is an interest rate increase. So if interest rate increase in the future, the bond value will decrease. Why? The new bonds will be more attractive because they are giving the high interest. So my bond value will decrease. So to protect that value, we will be going for the fair value hedge. That is called as fair value hedge to protect the current value of the assets or liabilities. And cash flow hedge in the sense due to changes in the variable in the future. If at all I am making any financial transactions in the future, maybe maybe due to the increase or decrease in the value of the currencies, if at all I am protecting to protect against the variable in the future cash flows. So maybe there are many things happening, inflation's happening, deflation's happening. So due to protect against that, if I'm paying anything in the future or receiving anything in the future, to protect against those cash flows, that is called as the cash flow hedge. Mainly to protect against the variability in the future cash flows, whereas net investment hedge means mainly with the currency levels. So due to protect against the appreciation or depreciation in the value of a currency, to protect against that, we'll be going for the net investment hedge. And mainly, so these are three main types of hedge. They won't ask you, it is of theory thing. Practicals will not be asked. You just have to know what does they mean. They may ask you with respect to the derivative types, they will go with the practicals, but whereas hedging, you won't be getting this only of theory part. Okay, then now we'll be moving over the four main types of derivatives. One is forwards, futures, swaps, and options. So forward and future, they have the same function, but the execution is different. The rules and regulations, terms and conditions is different. That is the both will have a same function, but the execution and the terms and conditions followed will be different. So we can have differences here. So forward contract and future contract are those, they come to an agreement today to either to buy or sell the asset in the future, underlying asset in the future date at a specified price. Both will does the same thing only. They both will come. These are the agreement or the contracting agreement today. We are entering into agreement today to buy in the future or sell in the future at a specified date at a specified price. That is called as that is a definition. But how they are executed, what is the terms and conditions, in which market they are traded, that is the differences between the forward and future contract. So definition: agreement to buy or sell the asset on the future date at a specified price. Same agreement. So it future also says the same, but it will be traded in the forward contract will be traded in the over the counter market. That means not traded in the exchange market, whereas future contract will be traded on the exchange market. That means New York Stock Exchange. It's a dealer's market, whereas this is a exchange market. New York Stock Exchange, Bombay Stock Exchange. So they will be having a standardized terms and conditions to be followed by the companies which are listed in the exchange market. Only companies that are listed there can be traded in the exchange market. So future contracts will be traded in the exchange market, whereas forward will be traded in the over-the-counter market. And customization, it can be fully customized. The terms, conditions, amount, date, price, everything can be customized based upon the parties involved. Whereas whereas in the future contract, all the companies will be having a standardized contract. They have to follow the standard given by the exchange market. Settlement usually settled at the expiration date. Maybe that means on the expiration date, either it can be purchased or sold, whereas in the future contract, it can be offset. That means it can be the customers, sorry, the parties can exercise the either they can purchase or sell before the expiration date. Okay, if at all there is a favorable conditions, they can exercise their options. They can exercise the contract. Then here in the forward contract, we may get the credit risk. They will be having high credit risk and default risk because as it is of in the dealer market, either of the parties can default on the contract if there is no favorable conditions, if it is not favorable to them. Whereas in the future contract, there is less risk because it is controlled by the exchange market. So there will be less risk of defaulting. And we have to know the long party and short party, very important when you are solving the questions with respect to the with respect to the forward futures or swaps or options. So long party is the person who is purchasing the underlying asset in the future, whereas short party is the person who is selling the assets in the at a contract price. So long party. So when you are solving the options questions, you have to be very perfectly know what party you are. So you have to make yourself stand in the long parties or short parties to know the gain or losses happening upon the transaction. Okay. So long party, that means if at all long party means either you are uh, purchasing you will be purchaser of the contract. You will be purchasing the contract, purchasing the underlying asset in the future, whereas short party means you are selling the underlying asset in the future. So these two long party and short party you have to know. Now we can get in for this is our forward and futures. Now we'll get into the swaps and options. Interest we come across under swaps we come across two swaps. One is interest rate swap, other one is the currency swap. Interest rate swap means mainly done for the interchanging of the interest rate, mainly done for the matching the revenue stream with the payment stream characteristics. So if one company wants to pay one company, let's say one company is paying the fixed interest rate, one company is paying the floating interest rate, but they want to interchange that. That is called as the changes in the interest rate, not in the principal amount. And one more thing you have to keep in mind that the notional amount, we say the imaginary base, the notional amount, the reference value should be same under the interest rate swap and currency swaps also. It should be the nominal amount will be same, but the interest rates will be only the interest rates will be exchanged. So forward contract, two parties exchange the future interest rate payments on the debt. Purpose match company's revenue stream with the payment streams. Usually the company with the fixed payments will go for the floating interest rate, whereas the company with the fluctuating revenue will go for the fixed interest rate. Yeah. So once again, I'll just the company which is having the floating fluctuating revenue will go for the fixed interest rate, when the company with the fixed revenue will go for the floating interest rate. So that means when the company is having a fluctuating revenue, they doesn't know how much revenue they will be getting. So if there is a fixed amount, so they may not be able to pay the interest rate. So that's why they go for the fixed interest. That's why they will go for the uh, fluctuating interest rate. Okay. So usually when the company is having the fluctuating revenue, they will go for the fixed interest rate. When the company is having a fixed revenue, they will go for the fluctuating interest rate. Okay. So that is how they swap. Only the swapping of the interest rate will takes place in the interest rate swap. The principal amount will be same. There is no swap of the nominal amount. Only the interest rate will be changing. Whereas currency swap, the same thing happens. Agreement to exchange the here principal amount and the interest payment will be in two different currencies. Purpose hedging the exchange rate risk, accessing the future funds. So what happens here is currency swap in the sense. Let's say if the main intention will be if at all I want to go and invest in some foreign countries, at that time we go for the currency swap, because once if we want to enter into if we want to invest in the foreign country, we have to purchase that foreign currency. So if I'm going and asking the loan with a foreign US, let's say US bank only, Indian company want to invest in US, that means they want the US currency first. So if Indian company is going and asking, Indian company will be a foreign company to the US. So if foreign company coming and asking the loan, definitely the interest rate will be, they'll be charging the high interest rate. So to access the cheaper interest rate, they will go for the so they will change the, so this, let's say company A is a Indian company, company B is a US company. Company A asks the US to get them a loan. So it will be of low interest, get them a loan. And whereas if the Indian company, sorry, foreign US company wants to invest in India, they may ask. So in that way, they will change their currencies. They'll change the, so a US company will take the loan and give it to the foreign company, sorry, Indian company, and Indian company will take the loan to the and give it to the foreign company, but the principal amount should be same. That means if at all I want $80,000 means 80,000 of dollars, I want the loan to invest in India. That means if I convert the 80,000 into the current value, let's say for example, it is of 83 right now. Let's just keep it as $1 equals to 83. That means if I want $80,000 divided by 85, that means, one second. That means I have to pay. So the loan amount should be, if at all I'm taking in India, it should be 68 lakh rupees. As per the, if at all I'm keeping $85 as a exchange rate. So when I convert that 85 lakhs, 68 lakhs into the foreign, into the dollars, it should be amounting to $80,000. So in that way, the amount has to be, the principal amount should be same. So both the principal's amount should be same, but the only thing is the interest will be paid when they are repaying. So that is how it takes place. So just understand in a as an overview. So principal amount should be same. When the company wants to go for the international financing, they want to invest somewhere in the foreign country. At that time, they go for the currency swap to get the cheaper funds and to reduce the exchange rate risk. Okay. Then we come for the options and calls, which is not tested much, but you have to understand the calls and puts and calls. Okay. So options, what does it gives? It gives only the rights but not the obligation to exercise the option in the future. So right gives the rights but not the obligation to buy or sell the underlying asset in the future. That means if at all it is favorable to us, we will exercise the option. If not, we will be not exercising the option. We doesn't have the obligation to exercise the option. Okay. It is called as options. We come across call option and put options, and we come across three situations here. When do we exercise the option? Only when the option is in the money. That means if for the call option in the money means the market price should be greater than the selling price. Only at that time the option will be exercised. So if the market price is equal to selling price, sorry, strike price, it is at the money. If the market price is less than the selling price, it is out of the money. We're not going to exercise it. So if at all, to find out the intrinsic value for the options, that means the actual worth of that particular value of that option, the option should be in the exercisable position. That means it has to be in the money to exercise. So when do we go for the call option? At what situation? When will you go for the call option? What is that? When you will go? That means will you be purchaser or will you be a seller in the future? When you want to make some payments or purchase anything, or when you want to sell or receive something, when will you go for the call option? When you are the purchaser. That means if at all I am purchasing in the future or making payments in the future, at that time, if there is high uncertainty of prices, so at that time I will be going for the call option. So if I want to exercise the call option, market price should be less than the strike price to exercise the call option. Market price should be less than the strike price if I want to exercise the put option. And we come across this also, option types, American versus European. It can be, options can be American, options can be European also. American option means you can exercise the option only at the time of expiration date. And European means we can exercise, American means we can exercise any time before the expiration date, whereas European, we can be exercising the option only at the expiration date. And covered call options, covered options will be there only for the call options, not for the put option. Keep that thing in mind. So covered call option means I am owning the stock and I am selling the call option on those stocks. That is called as covered call option. Investors own the stocks and sells a call option on the stock. I'm selling the call option. That means somebody is purchasing the call option from me. I am the writer of the option. That is covered call option. Whereas naked call option, I doesn't own the stocks, but I will be the writer of the call option. That is called as naked call option. So usually in the naked call option, I will be having a unlimited loss, limited profit. Limited profit means only the premium what I get is the profit I will be having in the naked call option. Whereas I can have an unlimited loss, because if at all the call option is exercised from the purchaser of the option, I will be having a unlimited loss, because I have to purchase for the market price and sell it for the strike price. So I will be having a unlimited potential loss in the naked call option. Then with respect to the how do we value the options, option valuations with the help of market value. Market value, how do you find out? Intrinsic value, that is plus the time value. Extrinsic value, you'll getting the market value. So intrinsic value means the actual worth. What is the actual worth of that particular option? What is the value I'm getting from that particular option? Market price minus the strike price. Usually when the option is at the exercisable position, only at that time we can find out the intrinsic value. So market price minus strike price gives us the intrinsic value for call option. Strike price minus the market price gives us the intrinsic value for put option. And time value is the more time remaining, the extra time. Just give me a minute. 1 second. So time value in the sense the extra amount people are willing to pay, because there is so much of time for the favorable price movement. So that means the longer the time, there is high chances that the strike price will move according to the in favor of us. That is called as time value. More time remaining. So if there is a more time remaining for the expiration date, there is a high chances that the price will move according to the in favor of us. So the more time remaining, the higher option value, because there is a more chances that the stock prices may move favorably according to us. So the higher the time, the option value will be more. The lower the time, the option value will be less. So that is what talks about the time value. So if there is if there is volatility, if there is a high volatility, that means there is a high value for the options. If there is less volatility, there is less value for the options. Interest rate also. The higher the interest rate, the higher the value will be there, because we are exposed to the risk. There is high risk, high interest, there is a longer time. So that these things you have to know. So this is how we value the options. So as an overview, you have to keep in mind these things has to be stuck in your mind. And with respect to the positions, are you a writer of the option or are you a purchaser of the option, will play a very important role in finding out the gain or loss. Okay. So these things you have to keep in mind with respect to the derivatives, types of derivatives. It is swaps, options, forwards, and futures. Then we move for the capital restructuring, raising capital in corporate restructuring. We come across, with publicly how we can raise the funds, privately how we can raise the funds. So public company financing, how the private company will raise the capital and how public company will raise the capital. So private company, and private company with mainly deals with the retained earnings, the amount the company the company owns, that is retained earnings. No borrowings needed. So that is also one way where the company can finance its operations with the the retained earnings. It is internal financing, internal fund. Then they can go for the commercial banks or financing and they can go for the lease financing, they can go for the venture capital to raise the fund in the private company, whereas in public company mainly deals with the IPO. What market will the IPOs will be issued? This is that market called as, what is that market where we issue the IPO? What market is that? Which is the market that we issue the IPO? Is it secondary or primary? It's a primary market. Yeah. So the market where we issue the first ever public sale of a company's shares issue, that market is called as primary market, usually offered to the when the company wants more cash and they're unable to raise it privately, then they go for the public offerings. Then in after that, so subsequent offerings also comes. That means additional shares issued after the IPO, whatever the additional shares issued after the IPO, so that will be issued in the secondary market. Since secondary offerings also comes existing, that means exist. So in subsequent, the company will receive the cash, whereas in secondary offerings, the existing shareholders are selling their personal holdings. At that, in secondary offerings, no capital will be coming into the company. Okay, there will be no raised cash. Only the investors, the shareholders will be getting the amount, not the company will be getting. And the investment banks will be helping with the raising the capital for both private company as well as public company. So investment banks will bring the investors and lenders who are in seek of lending or who are in seek of borrowing. They bring it and they will help us to find the lenders and find the borrowers. So they will investment banks will be having a triple role. They will be playing a triple role, which will be guiding the investors as well as the borrowers. So advising the company how much to raise, what capital, at what type, what price, what investors you want to go with. So these things will be advised. The triple roles will be paid. One is advising, then other underwriting. So investment banks can underwrite underwrite. That means it can buy the shares from the public offering, that when the public company issues, so it can buy all the IPO and keep it with its and resell it at a higher price, which is called as offering price. So underwriting means buying the securities from the company and selling it at a higher price. That higher price is called as offer pricing. If at all the entire shares are underwritten, that means whatever the IPO is issued, the entire IPO, if it is underwritten, then that is called as that term we can call it as a firm commitment. That means when the investment banks go for the firm commitment, it is guaranteeing that everything will be sold. If at all there is any credit risk, then it has to be bared by the investment banks. That is called as firm commitment. The bank is committed to the selling of the assets, selling of the shares. Whereas we come across one more, it is of best effort deal. That means the bank will not guarantee, but it will make it possible. It puts it possible efforts to sell all the assets, all the stocks, but there is no guarantee that the entire issue will be sold. That is called as, so two things we can come if the entire issues are underwritten. It is called as firm commitment. That means the credit risk will be entire credit risk will be paid by the investment banks. If it is not sold, then we come across the best effort deals also, where the risk will be written with the underwriting company, the company. And yeah, so the price the bank will be reselling, that is called as offering price. And the difference between the offer price and the purchase price, we will be calling it as a underwriting spread. And one more triple role, under triple role, the company can go for the marketing also, promoting the and selling the security to investors. So these are triple role taken by the investment banks to advise the investors as well as the lenders, the borrowers. Then we come across, we have to know these terms, shelf registrations. Registrations means the company registers securities with SEC in advance and can issue them within 2 years without filing a registration each time. So usually to avoid the registration cost, they go for the shelf registrations. So whenever we want to issue a new stocks, we have to register with the SEC. Here we assume US has a parent company. So whenever the US company want to issue their shares, they have to register first. So instead of multiple registrations, what they do, even though there is not requirement of there is no requirement, still they will register for the, let's say for 10 crores, they will register. So based on the favorability, based on the favorable conditions in the market, they will issue the shares. That is what called as shelf registration. So mainly done for taking the quicker advantage of the favorable conditions in the market to reduce the registration cost. So these are the points why the company go for, reasons why the company go for the shelf registrations. Then bond issues, investment, the same thing, the triple role played by when the bond is issued to the public. The investment banks will help them to advises based on the sizes, coupon rate, terms, all these things. And when the pool of investment banks come together to raise the capital, to raise the investment, that is called as syndicate. And firm commitment, I have told you, underwriter purchases all the securities from the company, bears full risk of selling. Then we come for the discounted cash flow mainly. So when the company is going for the business combinations, acquiring the other company, so they will go for the discounted cash flow. So we want to know if we're acquiring any of the company, we want to know what is the actual worth of the particular company. What is the maximum purchase price should be there to acquire. To know that, we will be going for the discounted cash flow with the help of the future free cash flows. So we will be calculating what is the future free cash flows the company can get. I can get from the particular acquiring the company I'm acquiring, and I'll translate that. I will discount that to the today's value and check what is the actual purchase price I have to pay today. Maximum purchase price I have to be paying to the company if I'm going for the business combination. So you'll be discounting it with the required rate of return. So mainly with the free cash flows. What is the free cash flow I will be getting from the acquisition? So free cash flow will be the net of, it is mainly talking about the actual revenue uh, I will be getting from the acquired company with respect to of interest. After tax free cash flow, we want to know, and if there is any capital expenditure, net of capital expenditure has to be taken to calculate the free cash flow. So based on the free cash flow, so you'll be evaluating what is the actual worth, what should be the price consideration if if I am acquiring the new company. Okay, so these things you have to be in mind when it is come to the raising capital. Then we come across under business combinations, corporate restructuring. That means mainly corporate restructuring is done to make changes in the company's operations, company's business, company's ownership. If the company wants the changes in its operations, in its financing way, or in its ownership, then they will be going for the corporate restructuring or business combinations. Corporate restructuring. So they may go for the mergers, acquisitions, divestitures to to improve the efficiency of the organizations, to improve the performance, so to expansions and growth. So that is the reasons why the company will go for the corporate restructuring. So we'll be starting with a merger, that is statutory merger. The two companies combine together, whereas only one company survives, the surviving company. So merger in the sense where the two companies combine together, where only one company survives, other companies dissolves. That surviving company will issue the acquired company the shareholders. Usually the shares of the acquiring company, surviving company will be given to the acquired company, the merged company. That is called as merger. And we come across statutory consolidation. That means both the companies dissolves and make a new company. That is called as statutory considerations and acquisitions. In acquisitions, we come across friendly acquisition and hostile acquisition. What do you mean by a hostile takeover? Hostile acquisition, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by hostile acquisition? Hostile acquisition, what do you mean by that? That means anyone? Hostile takeover, what do you mean by that? Forceful takeover of the company. Friendlier means it's by mutual cooperation the company will be acquired, whereas hostile means forcefully taking over the company. So hostile takeover. So we will come across the defenses also. Acquisition, one company buys another shares even after acquisition. So acquisition can happen in any ways, either by purchasing the shares, either by purchasing the assets. They can wholly acquire or partially acquire. Then we come across under acquisition, a merger and acquisition. We come across three kinds of merger and acquisition. One is horizontal, vertical, and conglomerate. Horizontal means we are acquiring the company which is under the same stage of line of business, same production stage. That means both are of same sectors. Bank combining with the bank, telecom combining with telecom industries, hotel combining with industries, hotel industry. That is what has horizontal merger. Whereas vertical means we come across two types there also, forward vertical and backward vertical, where we are combining with the different stages of the production cycle. So forward means we are merging with a company where we can reach our final customers. Just give me a minute. 1 second. 1 second. Sorry. So we can have a vertical merger or conglomerate. Vertical means we are combining with the different stages of production. We can go for forward vertical or backward vertical. Forward means we are combining with the companies which are of uh, uh, to meet our ultimate customers, whereas backward means we are combining with the companies which will be providing providing us the raw material for our finished goods. So that is vertical merger. And conglomerate, we are combining two different unrelated businesses coming together mainly for the expansion and growth. That is called as conglomerate. Main reasons for business combinations is of economies of scale to reduce the double cost, synergy, then sales enhancement, tax benefit, diversifications. All these are the reasons we go for the business. And one of the way to for the business combination is of divestitures. That means selling of the division in order to increase the wealth of the organization, so improve the efficiency. So mainly for those things, they will go for one of the way to restructure our companies of divestitures. So we can divestitures in voluntary liquidation. That means we can voluntarily sell the assets. We think that instead of running the assets, running the company, it is better. It is gives more value to us if at all we are selling it today. It is called as voluntary liquidation. That means we are selling off the asset and increasing the value of the shareholders by those value. Then partial asset, the company can partially sell a particular division or particular assets of the organizations. Then corporate spin-off, where the individual department of the organization will be we will be creating a separate. We'll be converting one of the individual division into a separate entity. Where the shares will be issued, where the majority of the shares will be taken by the parent company only. For example, corporate spin-off in the sense the one of the subsidiary will become the independent company, and that independent company shares will be issued to the parent company only. There is no capital raising in the corporate spin-off. Whereas equity carrot is like the company will be the subsidiary will be converted into the new separate company, but the amount where in the equity carrot there will be a wealth creation because the new company will be raising the capital with the IPO. There will be IPO, and but the thing we have to keep in mind in equity carrot is the majority of shares will be remaining with the parent company only, but the amount that we get from the IPO will be utilized for that particular new company itself. Whereas in corporate spin-off, there will be no cash involved. Just give me a minute. Okay. So that is equity carve out, one of the divestitures, and going private. It means we can buy back entire public issues, then we can go private. Then tracking, if at all we want to know one particular division's performance, then we can go for the tracking stock. So these things you have to keep in mind, the forms of divestitures you can follow. Then we have the takeover defense. I hope you know this. So to prevent us from the hostile takeover, we can have pre-offer defense and post-offer defense changes in the charter of the rules and regulations. Then where it has staggered board of elections, where the company will be staggering instead of electing the entire board directors, they will spread the board of directors, which will delay the takeover. Then super majority asking for 60 or 70% of majority to acquire. Fair merger prices means adding a clause that the shareholders, when if at all the acquisition is taking place, the shareholders has to be paid at least the fair value for all the shareholders. That is one of the way golden parachute, giving the if at all the acquisition takes place, the top executives has to be paid. The huge compensation has to be paid to the huge compensations has to be paid to the senior executives or the existing shareholders. Sorry, not existing shareholders. If at all the acquisition takes place, the top management people and the senior executives will be paid a huge amount. That is called as golden parachute. Then we have a poison pill. You have to know the difference between poison pill. Poison pill can be anything, but it conveys that either you are making the company unattractive, or you are making the company expensive. So in that, it can be in any ways. You can make it expensive by using any ways. You can make unattractive by any ways. So if at all the question says you are making it unattractive or expensive, that is called as poison pill. But particularly if says you with the amount of debt, by taking the huge debt, you are making it expensive, then it will be of poison put. Particular reasons, if they're specifying particular reasons for unattractiveness or the poison unattractiveness or the expensive, so they will be having some terms. If it is not specifying any purpose, it is simply telling you are making it expensive or you are making it unattractive, at that time it will be of poison pill. So poison put means we are taking the huge amount of debt and paying a one time of dividend to the shareholders, which will make the takeover expensive. That means when the company is acquiring, it is not only acquiring the shares or bonds, shares or the assets, it will be acquiring the liability also. So in poison put, the liability increases, which will make the company expensive. And voting right plans also, where they will limit the voting rights of the people or of the shareholders who are having the majority shares. So these are the pre-offer defense. Post means with the help of issuing the new IPOs. Pacman defense, backfiring, then until they get the standstill agreement. Then white knight selling for the requesting for the white knights to acquire them. Then crone jewel, selling of the old valuable assets of the company to the hostile take to the white knight. And leverage recapitalizations, you should be knowing the terms. These terms are very important because they can ask you in the MCQs the meaning of terms. So company borrows large amount, pays huge one-time dividend to the shareholders, increasing the debt, making it more attractive. That is called as leverage decapitalization. The takeover defenses, I'm not going in depth because you already know these points and we are talking about only the overview. Okay, so we'll just finish. We have not done with the this currency, so we'll go for that. We'll finish off the FDI. We can go for the exchange rates. Okay. FDI, where mainly the company go for the foreign financing, mainly for the higher profits, new customers, cheaper labors, better resources. These are the reasons why we go for the international financing. And there we come across FDI and FPI. FDI in the sense we are investing in the foreign country, not only the investment, we want a significant ownership and we want the managing control. So FDI is an investment in foreign production of business with intention of obtaining the significant ownership and management control, whereas FPI is investing in a financial securities without the management control. So you have to know the differences. Main reason why the company will go for FDI is for these reasons. So it can it can buy the existing foreign company, or it can start a new subsidiary, or it can go for the joint venture also. That is how the foreign financing takes place. The risk we can face, political risk, financial risk, and exchange rate risk are the common risk we face when we go for the foreign financing. And you have to know what are the advantages and disadvantages the home country and host country will be having by the FDI and FPI. Okay. Then we come across the international payment. So how in what all ways we can make the international payments. One is a prepayment, side drift, bankers acceptance, cross-border factoring, open account. All these are the international payments we can go where it will be where we can be using the internet, where these are the methods where we can go for the international payments. Uh, so yeah, so this is all about the points you have to keep in mind with the FDI and the country with the FDI, and what is the risk we are facing and what is the methods we can make to make the payments to reduce the risk, what all methods we can be using. So next we will be going for the one method, which is the currency exchange rates. So what should be the exchange rate between the two countries? We can just go little in depth on this particular topic because we were unable to do it in the revision class also. Okay, let's go in depth on this topic. Okay. Exchange rate risk. What should be the exchange rate when we are what should be the exchange rate between the two countries? That is, this, give me a minute. So exchange rate risk means what is the value of one currency and how much of currency is required to buy another country's currency. That is what talks about the exchange rate. What should the exchange rate risk? What should be the how much of one currency is needed to buy the another currency is what talks about the exchange rate risk. Here we come across to know the exchange rate risk. We list the currency into two things. How do we quote the exchange rate risk? The exchange rate risk with the two currencies. We divide the currency into base currency and the quote currency. So how do we list it? I'll just take one Excel sheet. Just a minute. So we come across two currencies. One is base currency and the other one is quote currency. So how do we express the exchange rate risk in the sense, if at all we are expressing with India and exchange rate between India and US, that means USA divided by INR. That means for always the base currency should be having the currency of one unit. So always base currency should be one in order to, if so 1 divided by, let's say, INR is of $85. So this is how we have to express. That means $1, 1 USD is equals to 85 rupees. So this is how we express the exchange rate risk. Current exchange rate. That means always we will divide the currency into base currency and quote currency. And this is how we express. And always the base currency should be having the unit of 1. It should be representing 1 unit. And INR and the INR, that is the quote currency, will be expressing how much of currency is required to buy one of the number of currency required to purchase one of the base currency. So base currency will be talking about the value of one currency unit, whereas INR will be of how much of number of currency required to purchase the 1 unit of base currency. Here we come across, one second. Here we come across, okay, the currency listed first will be the base currency, which will be having the value of 1 unit. Currency listed second, that is the quote currency, units needed to buy the base currency. And we have some convention order. That means it's a standard order which has to be followed when we are choosing which has to be the base currency, which has to be the quote currency. So usually, if at all we are dealing with the euro and pounds, that means euro will be the base currency, pounds will be the quote currency. If you are dealing with the euro and the USD, euro will be having the base currency, USD will be the quote currency. So this is how we have to place the base and quote currency as per the standard. So convention orders will be, so convention order means it will be having a standard where we have to to decide which will be the base currency and which will be the quote currency. If at all we want to convert the quote currency into base currency, let's say for example, I want to know how much will be the if I want to convert the in INR has a base currency and USA has a quote currency, what we can do? If it's want to be INR by USA, that means what we can do if we want to make the INR has a base currency, what we can do? 1 divided by the quote currency, we will get the just give me a minute. Sorry. Okay. So if at all we want to convert the quote currency into base currency, what we have to do? 1 divided by the quote currency. That means 1 divided by quote currency in this example equals to 1 divided by 85. That means we want, so 1 rupee is equaling to 0.011 of the quote currency, 0.11 of the US dollars. So 1 rupee can purchase 0.0117 of the quote of the USD. So if we want to convert the quote currency into the base currency, then we have to divide 1 divided by quote currency. You will be getting the we can convert the quote base currency into the quote currency. Sorry, quote currency into the base currency. Here we come across one crossover rate calculations. You may get it. So crossover rate means this is the exchange rate where the two unrelated companies crossover rate in the sense. So practice of using the third currency. For example, if I want to, we'll take between the let's say USD. Okay, we'll keep it India, USA, and Japan. Okay. So now Japan is yen. I will be keeping yen. Yen. Okay. So this is so let's keep India and Japan as not, it is not actively trading. Okay, there is no active trade between India and Japan, and India and USA is having a active trading, and USA and Japan is also having a active trading. So here, as these two countries, India and Japan, is not having doesn't have the active trading, what we will be doing? So to find out the exchange rate between the India and Japan, we will be using USA as a third currency to find out the crossover rate, find out the exchange rate between the India and Japan. That rate is called as crossover rate. Okay, so to find out the exchange rate between the two unactively traded countries, so you'll be using one third currency that is called as that rate is called as crossover rate. So how can we do it? Just let me give you one example. So for example, let's say, okay, so India will find out the crossover first. So India and US, and one more thing to keep in mind, USA should be the base currency when it comes to India as well as when it's coming to the yen. That means the third currency that we are using, it should be of India. It should be the base currency in India as well. It should be base currency in N also. So that means let's keep it in this way. 1 USD equals to 85 rupees and 1 USD equals to 150 yen. Okay. This is the exchange rate between India and US, India and N. So to find out the crossover rate, what we have to do, for example, you want to find out if at all the question is asking, find out the crossover rate between INR and Yen. Okay. So this is the crossover rate we want to know, exchange rate between INR and Yen. So whichever the amount, that means 1 INR equals to how much of Yen equals to question, how much of Yen. So if this is the case, how can you find the crossover rate in the sense? So what we can do, if this is the case, if N is the amount we have to find out. So the crossover rate will be the exchange rate of Yen, that is 150 rupees, 150 Yen divided by the 85 rupees, which is, so if we divide this divided by the 85, the code currency, so 1.76 it will be the crossover rate. This is how we calculate. If at all we want INR by Yen, the N exchange rate will be there in the numerator. INRs will be there in the denominator. So if at all we want Yen by INR, then it is ulta. That means 85 by Yen, 85 divided by 150. So equals to 85 by 150. This is how we calculate the crossover rate. So this rate is what we call it as exchange rate, crossover rate. Okay. So you may get the questions with respect to the crossover rate. Are you getting it, everyone? Able to understand? Able to understand any doubts you have here? Finding out the crossover rate, getting it right? Okay. So these things you have to keep in mind. Okay. Then we have to know in exchange rate risk, we have to know whether the currency is appreciating or whether the currency is depreciating. So we come across spot rate. It means today, what is the right now? What is the exchange rate? Exchange rate, it is called as spot rate. And today, if we are agreeing today for the future rate, it is called as forward rate. So we have to know the appreciation and depreciation between whether the currency is appreciating or whether the currency is depreciating. So how do we assign, for example, okay, let's say that I am purchasing something from US. Right now the exchange rate is $1 equals to 85. So I'm thinking, I'm planning to buy after a month. I want to purchase, let's say, for example, I have to purchase an iPhone. So if I am purchasing today, it will cost me 1 equals to 1 into 85,000. Let's say, for example, the iPhone will be costing me $1,000. Okay. I am planning to purchase an iPhone. So it is costing me 1,000. I am planning to purchase an iPhone after a month. Keep it in that way. So if at all I am purchasing it today, it will cost me 1 into 85. So $1 equals to 85. That means I want to spend $1,000. So it will cost me how much rupees? 85,000 rupees. That is spot rate. If at all I am purchasing today, this is the cost I am incurring. 85,000 rupees I am incurring. Let's say after a month, $1 equals to 80 rupees. What happens? So the $1 equals to 80 rupees now. That means it will cost me only 80,000 rupees in order to purchase. So what is happening here? What is happening to the Indian rupees now? Is it appreciating or depreciating? Before I have to spend 85,000 to purchase the iPhone. The same iPhone is costing me only 80,000 rupees after a month. What happened? Is it appreciating or depreciating? Indian rupees is appreciating against the US or depreciating against US? So before to purchase $1 of one US dollars, it is depreciating. Sure, it is appreciating. How before I have to spend 85 rupees to purchase $1, but now I will be able to purchase, I can spend only 80 rupees to purchase the same $1. So if I am able to, if I am gaining a purchasing power, more purchasing power. So before I have to spend more to purchase $1. Now I have to spend less to purchase $1. That means Indian rupees is appreciating against the US dollars. US dollar is depreciating against the Indian rupees. Okay. So this is so you have to know whether the currency is appreciating, whether the currency is depreciating. So what happens with the trade with respect to the appreciation and depreciation? So when appreciation happens, that means the currency will become stronger. What happens? My currency will become costlier. So what people will do, they will go for the cheaper. They want to, so my currency will be becoming costlier. The foreign currency will become cheaper when compared to my currency. So what people will do, they will purchase from the goods from the foreign country. So to access the cheaper resources, they will be cheaper country. So what they will do, they will purchase from the foreign country. So what does this will do? So what happens here is the imports will increase, exports will decrease. So as my currency become costlier, my goods becomes costlier. So people will reduce the exports and people will increase the imports. So there will be trade balance. It's a bad trade balance. That means trade balance in the sense it is um, export minus import. Trade balance means equals to exports minus imports. So here we are having a negative trade balance. So imports are more than the exports. So that will lead to the negative trade balance. Depreciation, when depreciation weakens, what happens? Exports will increase, imports will become costlier. So it will be a good trade balance. So you have to know the appreciation, whether the currency is appreciating or depreciating. Then with respect to the whether the currency is sold at a forward premium or forward discount. So we'll talk about that. Just give me a minute, okay? 1 second. To know whether the foreign currency is having a forward discount or a forward premium, how do we decide whether the currency is selling at forward premium or foreign currency is selling at forward discount or forward premium? What we will be doing it? Currency. Okay. So when it is forward premium, that means forward rate. That is forward rate is greater than the spot rate. That means we are agreeing. Today we are agreeing. You are agreeing today to buy or sell a currency in the future at a higher price than today's price. For example, today it is $1 equals to 83. You are agreeing to sell the currency at $1 equals to 85 rupees. So that is called as you are agreeing to purchase the currency for $1 equals to 85 rupees. That means the forward rate is greater than whatever you are agreeing today to purchase or sell in the future is having the greater price than the spot rate. That is called as, that is where we call it as the forward premium. Usually when forward premium happens, the currency is expected to depreciate. Okay. Then if it is to find out is it forward discount, that means so if the forward rate is greater than the spot rate, it is called as forward premium. If the forward rate is less than the spot rate, less than the spot rate, it is called as forward discount. So what happens here is, you are locking today for the higher price than the today. Discount means you are locking today, which is less. Okay, I'll just give you an example for this, just to keep in mind. Okay. So forward discount means forward premium, will keep it first. You are agreeing today. Let's say today is $1 equals to 83 rupees. Okay. So if at all you are agreeing today to purchase the US currency for $1 equals to 85 rupees, this is called as forward premium. You are agreeing today to purchase the foreign currency in the future for greater than the price of today. That is called as the forward premium. This situation is called as forward premium, whereas forward discount, it is ult of this. Forward discount, if you are entering it, let's say the same thing. Today is $1 equals to 85 rupees, but you are agreeing today to purchase the foreign currency in the future for $1 equals to 83 rupees. This is forward discount. Okay, so mainly here, so this is what called as forward premium and forward discount. Yeah, so these things you have to know with respect to so when is it they may ask you, is it a forward premium or forward discount? So you have to be knowing it. So to find out the percentage increase or decrease in the forward premium, forward discount, that means you forward rate minus spot rate divided by the spot rate, you will be getting to know the percentage increase or decrease in the currencies. Okay. So these things you have to know. Mainly you have to know whether the appreciation and depreciation effects. Due to mainly forward premium and forward discounts happens with respect to the appreciation and depreciations. So when the company is expecting that the currency will depreciate, they will sell it at a forward discount. When they think that the currency gonna appreciate, then they will go for the forward premium. Okay, when they think that when they think that the currency gonna appreciate in the future, they will discount it, they will sell it at a discount. If they think it is depreciating in the future, they will go for the premium. Okay, so these things you have to keep in mind. Then with respect to interest rate parity and the purchasing power, so we come across interest rate parity and purchasing power parity in the exchange rate risk. So here what happens is an interest rate mainly given for the investors. Mainly the main intention under the interest rate parity is the investors should earn the same returns wherever they are going and investing. So there are few investors who will be trying to earn the free profit. So mainly to avoid that free profit, they go for the interest rate parity has come up. So what they do in the interest rate parity mainly ensures nobody will be earning the free money. That means what they do, they will go and borrow somewhere where there is a low interest rate and invest somewhere where there is a high interest rate. So thereby they can earn the free profit. So to prevent them from receiving the having the free profit, this interest rate parity has come up. So what they do, so investors, the main intention behind the interest rate parity is to investors, wherever they are investing, they have to earn the same returns. They shouldn't be having any profit. So what they do, how do they adjust? How do they prevent? So if countries have different interest rate, forward rate must be adjusted. With the help of forward rate, they will be adjusting the free interest rate. So when the foreign interest rate is greater than the domestic interest rate, so they will the foreign currency they will sell at a forward discount. That means forward rates are less than the spot rate. So when the foreign interest rate is greater than the domestic interest rate, they will sell the currency at forward discount. If the foreign currency is greater than the domestic interest rate, they will go for the forward premium. So in that way, they will adjust the interest rates. Okay. So if one country gives the higher interest rates, its currency will lead to the forward discount. If foreign country is giving the highest interest rate, in order to in order to not get the free discount, they will sell the currency they will make it forward discount. If the foreign interest rate is less than the domestic interest rate, they will go for the forward premium. Just keep that in mind. If how they will adjust. So if the foreign interest rate is less than the domestic interest rate, they go for the forward discount. If their forward interest rate is greater than the less than the domestic interest rate, they go for the forward premium. Main purpose is what? Ensures nobody earns the free profit by investing in one country and earning more returns in the other country. Then purchasing parity talks about, so identical goods should have the same in different countries, one cannot using the current exchange rate. So what happened is, so purchasing power parity talks about, if at all, let's say for example, if I'm able to buy a phone, let's say iPhone in the India for 80,000 rupees. So if I convert that 80,000 into the US dollars, let's say I'm converting 80,000 divided by 80. That means $1,000 is the 1,000 is the USD. If I convert the 80,000 into USD, it will be 1,000 rupees, $1,000. That means if I purchase the same iPhone has to cost same $1,000 in the US also. So the same identical goods. So the same iPhone, there should be indifference in the amount or in the purchasing power of an asset. That means even if I buy in India or even if I buy in US, it should cost me same. That means if it is costing me 80,000 in India, it has to cost $1,000 in US. So that is what the purchasing power currency conveys. So currency should have a same purchasing power anywhere in the world. So that is what conveys in the purchasing power parity. So how do they adjust? Mainly inflation differences will be neutralized with the currency depreciation or appreciation. So they will neutralize this. They will make it neutralization with the help of inflation, either by depreciating the currency or appreciating the currency. They will make sure that the identical goods are having the same price all over the world. So these things you have to keep in mind. Then we come across exchange rate risk. It is of in-depth concepts. I can't go in-depth because of the time constraints. Then exchange rate risk. So we come across many exchange rate system, floating rate, fixed, managed, and pegged. So floating exchange rate means value of the currency is mainly entirely depend on the supply and demand of those currency. So it mainly depends on that. If the currency has a high demand, it will appreciate it will appreciate. If there is less demand, so if demand for a currency increases, currency appreciate. If the demand for currency decreases, currency depreciate. So the demand of the value of the currency will depend mainly on the supply and demand of the currency. Okay. So if currency appreciates, if there is a high demand for the currency, it will appreciate under the floating interest rate I'm talking about. So if there is high demand for currency, it will appreciate the currency. If there is low demand for currency, they will depreciate the currency. That is what happens in the floating exchange rate risk. Whereas fixed exchange rate risk, the government will be fixing the exchange rate risk and they will make sure, the central bank make sure that they will maintain it either by selling the currency or by buying the currency. So how do they? So government or central banks will fix the exchange rate risk and the central bank will actively make sure that the currency is fixed, the exchange rate is fixed. So how do they adjust? If at all it is, if the currency is weakening, if the currency is depreciating, what they do, they will sell the foreign currency and buy the foreign currency, local currency, to limit the risk, to make it fixed, um, to make the exchange rate fixed by the government, to maintain that fixed exchange rate. What they do, so if the currency depreciates, weakens, that means they will sell the foreign currency and buy the local currency. If the currency strengthens, if the currency becomes stronger against the other currency, then they will buy the foreign currency and sell the local currency. So this is how they maintain the stability in the exchange rate risk, exchange rate. Okay. Then managed float, it is a mix of floating as well as fixed. That means usually mostly depend on the demand and supply. But if at all it is going beyond the limits of the central bank, then central bank will intervene and they will make sure that the currency is at limit, under control. That is called as managed float. And pegged means, so we are pegging currency linked to another major currency. Let's, for example, $1 equals to, so India is pegging its currency with US. That means $1, it will always try to maintain $1 equals to 85 rupees with the US. So that is what called as pegged. That means in fixed, what happens? It will be fixed. The central bank will ensure that the exchange rate is 1 equals to $85 only. There is no movements in this. But whereas in pegged, what happens? There will be slight movements with respect to the exchange rate. We are pegging. We will ensure that at least we will be near to that particular rate. $1 equals to 85 means we will make sure that the central bank will make sure that there will be slight movements, but not fixed. There will be slight, that is the only difference between the fixed and pegged. There will be slight movements in the rates, but make sure that the central bank makes sure that either by depreciating the currency or appreciating the currency, either by selling or purchasing the currencies, it will make sure that it will be maintaining the same exchange rate risk. That is what called as pegged. So as an overview, please understand, we can't go in depth. So this is what the exchange rate risk talks about. Then we will be going for the how we can hedge the exchange rate risk. We come across natural hedging, operational hedging, international hedging, and currency markets with the help of forward futures. So natural hedging means structure operations so revenues and expenses denominated in the same currency. That means making the revenues and expenses in the same currency itself. So that will eliminate the exchange rate risk only. That is called as natural hedge. I am making the revenue in the same currency. That means let's say I am making the manufacturing in the US. I am making the, earning the revenue in the US. So that means there is no exchange rate. So whatever the revenue I get will be used to offset the liabilities. The remaining will be translated to remaining can be converted to the my currency. That is called as, so up to a certain limit, we can reduce the exchange rate risk. It is called as natural hedge, making the revenues and expenses in the denominated in the same currency. Whereas operational hedge means reducing the currency risk by changing the locations, diversifying. So diversifying the operations across the multiple currency, where the gains in one currency may be used to offset the losses in the other currency. So operational hedges that changing the location of the production, so thereby diversifying, by hedging the risk, one way of hedging the currencies. Whereas international financing hedge is like borrowing the same currency as cash inflows. That means, for example, let's say I am earning the revenue in the US and I will borrow the loan in the US only, so that with the help of US I can repay the whatever the amount is, whatever the loan I have taken. That is called as international financing hedge. Here also we will be eliminating the exchange rates. So with the cash inflows, I will repay the amount, remaining amount I will be converting it to my currency. That is called as international financing hedge. Then currency market hedge is like with the help of derivatives, with the help of forward futures, currency and options. So I will lock for today's currency. So that is how I hedge the risk in the currency market hedge. So these are the four strategies we can use when we're dealing with to reduce the risk exposure to the exchange rates. Then the last things we are left out with the ADRS, stock rights and warrants. So ADRS, if the company want to make the investment in the public offering to the foreign countries, but it doesn't want to go with the legal or SEC registrations, at that time they can go for the ADRS. That means allow foreign companies to participate in US market without the full SEC registration. So how does it act? I'll just tell you how this works out. So let's say, for example, Wipro company want to invest in the US, but it doesn't want to go under the SEC registration. So what Wipro company will do, it will invest its shares in the US bank. US bank in return will give them the ADRS. So that ADRS will be traded as a shares in the, if at all a US people will purchase that ADRS, that means they are actually owning the assets or actually owning the shares of the Wipro company. So that is how Wipro, what Wipro is doing here. So even though even though they are not undergoing the SEC registrations, they are offering their shares to the US public. That is what takes place. So if the company doesn't want to go under the SEC registrations, then they can go with the ADRS to make the trading in the US markets. Then we go for the stock rights. So what should be the rights? Stock right means when the company issues the rights which gives us the shareholders to purchase the shares in the future. So usually the shares, the stocks which are issued with the rights will be having more value when compared to the shares which are issued without the rights. So that rights gives us in the future, we can purchase the shares at some discounted prices. So right to buy the new stock from issuing company at a given price before the certain date. So that we call it as if that right is given to the existing shareholders, it is called as primitive rights. You will be knowing to maintain the ownership of the same ownership. So the existing shareholders will be getting the primitive rights. So three choices will be there to the people who are having the stocks with the rights. Either they can exercise the right, either they can exercise, or they can just sell those rights, or they can let it expire. So there are subscriptions period to exercise those rights. Usually they will be having 3 weeks or less. And how do you value the right? So usually the stocks with the rights on will be having more value when compared to the stocks without the rights. So value rights on means the stocks with the rights issued with the rights, whereas X right means the stocks without the rights. Then warrants, we come across warrants. So we have employee stock options and warrants. Warrants in the sense, so that warrants also gives us the rights to purchase the shares in the future. Future in the some specified prices. Employee stock options, instead of giving the bonus or any increments, so the company can give the employee stock options where the employees can purchase the shares in the future. So depends on the values as stock price increases. So if at all in the future the stock price increases, the employees can purchase it at a specified price, whatever the price might be, the market price might be at that particular time. So employee stock option is one thing, and warrants also gives us the rights to purchase the shares in the future. We have detachable warrants, we have non-detachable warrants. That means detachable means we can separate the warrants and bonds. Usually we will be selling the bonds with the warrants mainly to reduce the interest, because when we sell the warrants with the bonds, they have the rights to access what we can convert the warrants into the shares in the future, so which will reduce the risk to the bondholder, mainly done for the reducing the interest rate. So detachable warrants can be separated. When it is detachable warrants, we have to particularly specify what is the value of warrant and what is the value of bonds at a fair prices. And non-detachable means cannot exist without the bond. That means we cannot separate the bonds with the warrants. Then we have one more, I think we can Standalone warrants also we have. That means we can separately sell the warrants also. That also works out. So in this way, the company can increase their earnings, the options they can be using with the stock options, which are the warrants. So these are the things you have to know with respect to the stock rights, warrants, and ADRs. The overview, we have not gone in depth. So as in the revision class, we have covered many of the things except exchange rate risk. So I hope you know this. So this is the overview of the entire section B. So I hope you got it. Any doubts you have, you can address it here. Any doubts you have here? So we have not gone in depth. So make sure you will be revising it once again. In the revision class, we have gone except the exchange rate risk. So if you have any doubts with exchange rate risk, you can just connect to me personally. Okay. So I hope it is clear to everyone. Any doubts you have? So if you have no doubts, that means we are done with the booster session. I hope this booster session was helpful for you guys. If you have any doubts, you can just reach out to me at any time. Okay. So personally, you can reach out. We'll help you with whatever the particular, if at all you have any doubts in particular topics, we can have a one-on-one session and we can clear your doubts. Okay. So yeah, so we are done with the booster session. I hope this is helpful. Okay. So yes, we can wind up the class for today. So thank you for everyone joining us. Yes, thank you. CBQs, I'm not sure. So if are you guys, one second.